A stupid thug messed with the wrong royal guard. What happens next is shocking. The bustling streets outside the palace were alive with chatter. Tourists snapped pictures, waved flags, and crowded the gates, eager for a glimpse of tradition. Among them stood Ethan, a royal guard whose stoic figure and unflinching gaze symbolized the strength of the monarchy. Dressed in the iconic red tunic and bearskin hat, Ethan was more than a symbol. He was a trained protector, blending ceremony with security. Ethan had learned to tune out the usual provocations. Tourists often made silly faces, waved in his line of sight, or shouted to break his composure. Today, though, something felt different. A wiry man in his late 20s, dressed in a hoodie and sneakers, emerged from the crowd. His steps were casual, but his eyes locked onto Ethan with an unsettling focus. The man smirked as he approached, weaving through tourists with an air of confidence that bordered on arrogance. "Oi, big guy! Can't you blink or something?" the thug called out, his voice cutting through the din of the crowd. He stopped a foot from Ethan, grinning as he waved a hand in his face. "Hello? Anyone in there?" Ethan didn't move. His gaze remained fixed on the horizon, as though the man didn't exist. But behind his disciplined facade, Ethan's mind was sharp and calculating. He had been trained to recognize threats, and this man had already set off alarm bells. The thug chuckled. "Guess they trained you lot to be statues, huh? Bet you can't even sneeze without permission." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a mocking whisper. "You're just a puppet, aren't you?" A few tourists began filming, their laughter mixing with murmurs of disapproval. Some found the thug amusing, others were uncomfortable. Ethan remained unresponsive, his silence infuriating the man. "All right, tough guy. Let's see how far I can push you." The thug raised his hand, pretending to brush the brim of Ethan's bearskin hat. Before he could make contact, a sharp, authoritative voice rang out. "That's enough." The crowd turned to see a middle-aged man with a stern expression stepping forward. "Leave him alone." The thug turned and scoffed. "What's it to you, mate? He's not complaining." The man stood his ground. "Show some respect. He's not here for your entertainment." Ethan didn't react to the exchange, but he noted the tension in the thug's posture as he backed off with a dismissive wave. "Fine. You lot have no sense of humor anyway." The crowd began to disperse, and the thug melted into the flow of tourists. To the untrained eye, the incident was over, but Ethan knew better. His eyes, though seemingly fixed ahead, tracked the thug's movements as he disappeared into the distance. Hours later, Ethan stood in a secure briefing room deep within Buckingham Palace, the ceremonial uniform replaced by plain clothes. In front of him, a team of analysts reviewed footage from the incident. The thug's behavior had raised red flags, but something else had caught Ethan's attention. "Pause it there," Ethan said, his voice calm but commanding. The footage froze, showing the thug's hand brushing against a nearby tourist. "Zoom in on his hand." The image sharpened, revealing a small metallic object, a tracking device, barely the size of a coin. The analysts exchanged glances. "He wasn't just provoking me," Ethan said, leaning forward. "He was testing how close he could get without being stopped. He's planning something." One of the analysts nodded. "We've flagged his movements since he left. He's been circling the area and making calls. It's suspicious, but nothing concrete yet." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Do we have his location now?" "Yes." The analyst pulled up a live map, a red dot blinking in a nearby neighborhood. "He's heading east. Looks like he's meeting someone." Ethan stood, his calm exterior masking the urgency coursing through him. "Send me the coordinates. I'll follow up." The thug walked briskly through a quiet alley, a smug grin on his face. He thought he had pulled one over on the palace guard, a silent figure who couldn't lift a finger to stop him. Everything was going according to plan. His phone buzzed. He pulled it out, reading the message. "Confirmed. Same spot. Don't be late." He smirked, tucking the phone away as he turned a corner. But then he paused, a chill running down his spine. The alley felt wrong. Too quiet. He glanced over his shoulder, his eyes narrowing. There was no one behind him, yet the air felt charged with an unseen presence. Unbeknownst to him, Ethan was already close. As the thug moved deeper into the alley, Ethan followed, blending into the shadows. The small tracking device Ethan had planted on the thug earlier, a seamless move during their brief encounter, allowed him to monitor every step. The thug's phone buzzed again. Another message. "You're not alone." His heart raced as he read the words. He turned sharply, scanning the alley for signs of movement, but it was empty. Panic began to creep in. And then, from the corner of his eye, he saw a shadow shift. Ethan was just getting started. The thug's heart pounded as his eyes darted through the alley, searching for the source of the shadow he thought he saw. His hand instinctively went to his pocket, brushing against the unfamiliar bump of the tracking device he hadn't noticed before. His mind raced as realization struck. Someone had tagged him. But how? And when? He cursed under his breath, his earlier confidence crumbling. The guard. The silent, unflinching guard outside the palace, he had to be the one responsible. The thug had thought the guard was just another stoic figure, trained to ignore the chaos around him. But now, it was clear Ethan was much more than he seemed. The thug spun around, adrenaline coursing through him, and broke into a run. Ethan followed at a measured pace, his training keeping him calm. He didn't need to rush. The tracker was doing its job, broadcasting the thug's every move to his secure device. In his ear, the analyst from the palace provided updates. "He's heading south toward the warehouses by the river," the analyst said, her voice steady. "It's a known hotspot for illegal activity. Be advised, there could be others." Ethan nodded, his eyes scanning the thinning crowd as he moved. His plainclothes attire allowed him to blend in seamlessly, his movements fluid and precise. He knew these streets well and anticipated the thug's path. This wasn't the first time Ethan had tracked someone through London's maze of alleys and side streets. The thug veered into a narrow passage, his breath coming in quick bursts. He pulled out his phone, his fingers trembling as he typed. "I'm compromised. Someone's following me." The reply came almost instantly. "Lose him. Don't lead him here." The chase continued, the thug weaving through crowded streets, ducking into alleys, and vaulting over fences in a desperate attempt to shake his pursuer. But Ethan was always one step behind, his movements calculated and unrelenting. He wasn't just chasing the thug, he was hurting him, steering him toward a specific destination. "Do we have intel on who he's meeting?" Ethan asked quietly into his mic. "Not yet," the analyst replied. "But if he's heading to the warehouses, there's a strong chance it's connected to the network we've been monitoring. Stay on him." Ethan's jaw tightened. The network in question was a sophisticated criminal organization that had been on the radar of palace security for months. They were suspected of planning a major heist targeting royal assets, and Ethan's assignment was to gather evidence to dismantle them. The thug was a small piece of the puzzle, but he could be the key to uncovering the larger operation. The thug's lungs burned as he reached the edge of the industrial district. The streets here were desolate, the air thick with the smell of oil and rust. He slowed his pace, his ears straining for any sound of pursuit. For a moment, it seemed like he'd lost whoever was following him. He ducked behind a stack of crates, trying to catch his breath. Pulling out his phone, he typed another message. "I need help. I think it's the palace guard." The response sent a chill down his spine. "If it's him, you're already exposed. Don't come here." Frustration boiled over as the thug slammed his fist against the crate. Whoever this guard was, he wasn't normal. And now, the thug was on his own. Ethan watched from the shadows, his sharp eyes locked on the thug's hiding spot. He could see the man pacing, his movements erratic. The tracker had done its job, leading Ethan to the heart of the criminal district. Now, it was time to make a move. Reaching into his jacket, Ethan activated a secondary device, a discreet drone no larger than a bird. It buzzed silently as it rose into the air, its camera feeding live footage back to Ethan's device. From above, the drone revealed more than just the thug's location. It showed the entrance to a nearby warehouse, where 2 other men stood guard. "Confirmed," Ethan murmured. "He's heading to a meeting." The analyst's voice came through his earpiece. "Backup is 5 minutes out. Can you hold position?" Ethan's lips twitched in a faint smirk. "I'll do more than hold." The thug, desperate and cornered, finally stepped out from behind the crates. He glanced toward the warehouse, debating whether to ignore the warning messages and make a run for it. But before he could decide, a voice cut through the stillness. "Looking for someone?" The thug froze, his head snapping toward the source of the voice. Ethan emerged from the shadows, his calm demeanor betraying none of the effort it had taken to get here. His hands were relaxed at his sides, but his stance radiated authority. You followed me?" The thug stammered, his bravado replaced by fear. "How? You didn't even move back there." Ethan tilted his head slightly, his eyes narrowing. "You underestimated me. That was your first mistake." The thug's hand darted toward his pocket, but Ethan was faster. In a blur of motion, he closed the distance between them, grabbing the thug's wrist and twisting it just enough to make him drop the phone. The device clattered to the ground as the thug cried out in pain. "Your second mistake," Ethan continued, his voice low and even, "was thinking I wouldn't notice your little stunt earlier." The thug glared at him, panic flashing in his eyes. "You don't know who you're messing with." "No," Ethan said, his tone unyielding. "You don't know who you're messing with." With a sharp tug, Ethan forced the thug to his knees, keeping him subdued. He retrieved the thug's phone and glanced at the most recent messages. The confirmation he needed was there: plans, contacts, and coordinates. The warehouse wasn't just a meeting spot, it was a hub for the network's operations. Ethan pressed his earpiece. "Target secured. Moving to Phase 2. As the sound of sirens approached, Ethan knew the real operation was only beginning. The sound of distant sirens grew louder, bouncing off the walls of the desolate industrial district. Ethan stood over the subdued thug, his grip firm but calm, his mind already racing ahead. The thug's phone in Ethan's hand was a treasure trove of information. The sound of distant sirens grew louder, bouncing off the walls of the desolate industrial district. Ethan stood over the subdued thug, his grip firm but calm, his mind already racing ahead. The thug's phone in Ethan's hand was a treasure trove of information. Names, locations, and coded messages painted a picture of a sprawling operation, one that had just taken its first major hit. The thug squirmed against Ethan's hold, his bravado cracking under the weight of impending capture. "You think you've won, huh? You don't know who you're dealing with." Ethan crouched slightly, his calm gaze boring into the thug's panicked eyes. "You're right. I don't know you. But I know enough." His voice was steady, almost unnervingly so. "And I'm about to find out the rest." The sirens stopped abruptly, replaced by the sound of heavy boots hitting the pavement. Backup had arrived. A team of plainclothes officers emerged from unmarked vehicles, moving with practiced efficiency. Ethan handed the thug off to one of them, his demeanor unchanging as he straightened his jacket. "Secure him," Ethan said simply, passing the phone to the lead officer. "Focus on the warehouse next. There's more." The officer nodded, glancing at the phone. "Good work, Ethan. You joining the breach?" Ethan gave a curt nod. "Wouldn't miss it." The team regrouped a short distance from the warehouse, their movements quiet and deliberate. Ethan scanned the building through the live drone feed on his device. The 2 guards at the entrance were armed, their postures tense. Inside, the thermal imaging revealed several more figures, at least 6, clustered around tables filled with what appeared to be stolen artifacts and weapons. "Looks like they've got a shipment ready to move," one of the officers whispered, pointing at a delivery truck parked behind the building. Ethan's jaw tightened. "If that shipment leaves, we lose them." "Agreed," the lead officer said. "How do you want to play this?" Ethan's mind worked quickly. "We need to secure the guards at the entrance silently. A direct breach could put the rest on high alert and risk them scattering." He looked at the officer. Give me 2 minutes. Before anyone could protest, Ethan moved, his footsteps as silent as a shadow. His training allowed him to blend seamlessly into the darkness, each movement precise and deliberate. The 2 guards outside were alert but unprepared for what came next. Ethan approached from the blind side, his movements calculated. The first guard barely had time to react before Ethan's arms snaked around his neck, applying just enough pressure to render him unconscious without a sound. "Clear," Ethan whispered into his mic. The team moved in behind him, securing the unconscious guards and preparing for the breach. Inside the warehouse, the atmosphere was tense. The criminals gathered around a table covered in maps, laptops, and crates filled with stolen items. They spoke in low voices, their words a mix of coded instructions and nervous banter. One of them, a wiry man with sharp eyes, glanced at the entrance. "Where are the guards?" he muttered, suspicion creeping into his tone. Another shrugged, his hand resting on a pistol. "Probably bored out there." "Relax." The sharp-eyed man wasn't convinced. He stood, his gaze sweeping the room. "Something doesn't feel right." Before he could act, the door burst open. The officers moved with precision, their presence overwhelming the room in seconds. Commands were shouted, weapons drawn, and criminals scrambled to comply. One tried to flee through a side door, only to find Ethan waiting for him. "Going somewhere?" Ethan asked, his voice calm as he blocked the exit. The man hesitated, his eyes darting between Ethan and the open door behind him. Then, with a frustrated growl, he lunged. Ethan sidestepped effortlessly, his movements fluid as he disarmed and subdued the man in a matter of seconds. "You never learn," Ethan said quietly, securing the man's wrists with a zip tie before hauling him back inside. With the criminals detained and the warehouse secured, the officers began cataloging the evidence. Ethan scanned the room, his eyes landing on a map pinned to the wall. Red circles marked several locations across London, each connected by lines that converged on one spot, the palace. Ethan stepped closer, his hand brushing over the map. "They were planning something big," he murmured, his voice low. His gaze shifted to a set of blueprints on the table, showing the layout of the palace grounds. One of the officers joined him, his expression grim. "Looks like they were mapping out entry points. This was more than just a heist." Ethan nodded, his mind racing. The stolen artifacts were only part of the puzzle. This operation wasn't just about wealth, it was about power. Whoever was behind it had ambitions far greater than anyone had anticipated. As the team wrapped up, Ethan approached the lead officer. "We need to dig deeper into this network. The man I tracked today wasn't the leader, just a cog in the machine." The officer nodded. "Agreed. But this was a solid hit. We've disrupted their operations and taken a lot of key players off the board." Ethan's expression remained serious. "It's not enough. They'll regroup. Whoever's at the top won't stop here." The officer clapped him on the shoulder. "You did good today, Ethan. Get some rest. We'll pick this up tomorrow." Ethan didn't respond immediately. His mind was already turning over the next steps, the unanswered questions that lingered. Finally, he nodded, his resolve unwavering. "Tomorrow," he said quietly. But deep down, he knew there was no time to waste. Ethan stood at his post outside the palace, his face an impassive mask of discipline. The morning crowd was its usual blend of eager tourists and curious onlookers, all snapping photos and waving in his direction. On the surface, it was a typical day. But in Ethan's mind, the events of the previous night were still unfolding. The map, the blueprints, the intercepted messages, it all pointed to something far bigger than a single thug or a stolen shipment. The network Ethan had infiltrated was planning an unprecedented breach of royal security, and whoever was orchestrating it remained in the shadows. As Ethan's shift neared its end, a plainclothes officer approached, blending into the crowd before slipping him a small, unmarked envelope. Ethan's sharp eyes caught the subtle handoff, and he waited until he was back in the privacy of the palace barracks before opening it. Inside was a photo of a man, mid-40s, clean-cut, with a sharp gaze that suggested years of experience in darker dealings. Beneath the photo was a single line of text. Martin Wells. High-level operative. Warehouse lead. Meeting scheduled tonight. Location attached. Ethan's lips pressed into a thin line. Wells was no small-time thug. He was the kind of player who could connect the dots of the operation. Ethan knew this meeting would be his chance to get closer to the heart of the conspiracy. But there was a problem. That evening, Ethan stood beside an unmarked police car parked in the shadows near the meeting location, a crumbling, abandoned hotel on the city's outskirts. The building was a relic of faded grandeur, its graffiti-streaked walls and shattered windows bearing witness to years of decay. The perfect cover for men like Wells. The approaching sound of footsteps broke Ethan's focus. Turning, he saw a woman in her mid-30s, dressed in plain clothes, with sharp features and a confident stride. Detective Sergeant Hannah Ward. Her reputation for handling high-risk operations was well known among London's police force. "Ethan," she said, nodding curtly. "Glad you're here." "DS Ward," Ethan replied, shaking her outstretched hand. "Didn't expect the police to be so involved this early." "Your intel expedited things," Ward said, pulling a tablet from her bag. "This meeting could be our best chance to pin Wells and his people before they move on the palace." She tapped the screen, showing a detailed layout of the hotel. "Wells always operates with a fallback. He'll have men posted at every exit, and he'll disappear the second he smells trouble. We need to keep this clean." Ethan nodded, his focus unshakable. "What's my role?" "You're our insider," Ward said. "Your work tracking the warehouse players brought us here. Stick to what you do best, stay close, observe, and adapt." Ethan smirked faintly. "You're putting a lot of trust in me." "I don't trust easily," Ward shot back, her tone teasing but serious. "Let's move." The police team moved with precision, taking up positions around the hotel's perimeter. Ethan and Ward approached the building through a side entrance, slipping through a shattered window on the ground floor. The air inside was damp and thick with the scent of mildew. The faint hum of voices carried from the upper floors. "2 guards at the main entrance," Ward whispered, adjusting her earpiece. 3 more near the stairwell. Wells won't make this easy. He's expecting trouble," Ethan replied quietly. "We can't give him a chance to run." Ward nodded. "You take the lead." Ethan didn't hesitate. His steps were deliberate as he moved through the shadows, avoiding loose debris and creaking floorboards. At the base of the staircase, he paused, motioning for Ward to stop. 2 men stood at the top, their postures relaxed but their eyes sharp. The first guard fell without a sound. Ethan moved like a shadow, his arm wrapping around the man's neck in a chokehold that rendered him unconscious in seconds. He eased the body to the ground, then turned his attention to the second guard, who had started to turn at the faint sound. Before he could react, Ethan lunged, striking him sharply in the ribs and delivering a precise blow to his jaw. The man crumpled. Ward gave him an approving nod. "Efficient." The voices grew louder as they reached the second floor. Peering through a cracked doorway, Ethan spotted Wells and a group of men gathered around a table. Blueprints and maps covered the surface, with the palace's layout at the center. Red lines marked entry points and routes through the palace grounds. Laptops and scattered papers hinted at more layers to the plan. Wells stood at the head of the table, gesturing to the blueprint. "The guard at the warehouse was an inconvenience," he said, his tone sharp. "But it doesn't change the timeline. The palace rotation gives us the window we need." One of the men shifted nervously. "What if they've connected the dots? If they know?" "They don't," Wells snapped. "We stick to the plan. By the time they figure this out, it'll be too late." Ethan's grip tightened on the doorway frame. This was it, the heart of the operation. But as he prepared to move, a phone rang sharply, cutting through the tension. Wells answered, his voice calm but irritated. "Speak." A pause. His expression darkened. "What do you mean they're close?" Ethan exchanged a glance with Ward. Wells was already on edge. They couldn't afford to wait any longer. Ethan stepped into the room, his presence commanding. "Going somewhere, Wells?" The men froze, their eyes snapping to Ethan. For a moment, there was only silence. "Who the hell are you?" Wells demanded, his hand hovering near the table. Ethan's tone was calm but firm. "The guard you didn't expect." Chaos erupted as Wells' men scrambled for their weapons. Ethan moved quickly, disarming one man with a sharp strike and knocking another to the ground with a swift kick. Ward entered behind him, her weapon drawn, shouting for the men to freeze. The room descended into chaos, but Ethan's training kept him in control. Wells bolted for a side door, but Ethan was faster. He intercepted him at the threshold, slamming him against the wall. "It's over," Ethan growled. Wells sneered, his voice venomous. "You have no idea what you're stopping. This isn't just about the palace, it's about everything." Ethan's grip tightened. "Then start talking." But before Wells could answer, a loud metallic crash echoed from outside the room. Backup had arrived, and the fight wasn't over yet. The loud crash reverberated through the crumbling building, shaking the fragile walls. Ethan didn't loosen his grip on Wells, his gaze unwavering. Whatever reinforcements Wells had called were outside now, and the seconds ticking away felt like hours. "Your friends are here," Ethan said evenly, pinning Wells against the wall. "What's the plan? Stall me until they clean this up?" Wells smirked, his confidence inching back. "You're out of your depth, guard. Do you think this ends here? You've barely scratched the surface." Ethan's jaw tightened. He didn't need Wells' taunts, he needed answers. Before Wells could continue, Ward's voice cut through the tension. "Ethan, we've got company," she said sharply, motioning toward the doorway. "2 vehicles just pulled up. Armed men." Ethan turned to Ward. "Secure him. I'll handle the rest." Ward hesitated for a split second before nodding. She pulled Wells away, cuffing his hands behind his back and forcing him into a corner. Wells struggled weakly but didn't fight too hard. His confidence suggested he still believed he could turn the situation in his favor. Ethan stepped into the hallway, his senses sharpened. The sound of boots pounding against the ground floor grew louder, accompanied by voices barking orders. Reinforcements were moving in fast. He moved swiftly toward the staircase, keeping low as he positioned himself at the top. From his vantage point, Ethan counted 5 men entering through the shattered front door. Each carried an assault rifle, their movements coordinated and practiced. This wasn't an amateur response. These men were hired professionals, likely brought in to eliminate witnesses and salvage the operation. Ethan's voice was calm as he spoke into his comms. "Ward, we've got 5 hostiles. Hold your position with Wells." "Understood," Ward replied. Ethan moved with precision, using the broken banister for cover as the men ascended the staircase. He waited until the first man reached the top before striking. With a single fluid motion, Ethan yanked the rifle from the man's hands, delivering a crushing blow to his face with the stock. The man crumpled to the ground, and Ethan quickly rolled out of sight. The sharp cracks of bullets echoed through the stairwell, splintering the decayed wood around him. Ethan moved quickly, staying one step ahead of his attackers. He ducked behind a corner, pulling a small, compact smoke grenade from his jacket. With a flick of his wrist, he tossed it into the stairwell, the hissing cloud quickly engulfing the area. The hired guns coughed and shouted as the smoke disoriented them. Ethan used the chaos to his advantage, slipping behind one of the men and disabling him with a precise strike to the back of his head. Another turn too late, his rifle swinging wide as Ethan grabbed his arm and twisted, forcing the weapon free before delivering a sharp knee to his ribs. The remaining 2 men regrouped at the base of the stairs, shouting orders into their radios. "Target is upstairs. Move in now!" Ethan's mind raced. The reinforcements weren't just here to extract Wells, they were here to wipe out everyone, including Wells himself. Loose ends didn't fit into operations this large, and Wells, as valuable as he was, had clearly become expendable. Ethan retreated back into a hallway, reloading the confiscated rifle as he moved. He had to secure Wells and Ward before the final wave arrived. In the meeting room, Wells had regained some of his composure, his smug smirk returning as Ward kept her weapon trained on him. "Your little operation isn't going to stop this," Wells sneered. "You think cutting me off stops the network? There are 10 more like me, each ready to take my place." Ward didn't flinch. "If that's true, then you're irrelevant. But you're still going to answer for what you've done." Before Wells could reply, Ethan burst back into the room. "We've got more incoming," he said quickly. Wells' smirk vanished. "What?" he snapped, his confidence faltering for the first time. "You heard me," Ethan said, his tone icy. "They don't want witnesses, and you're just another liability now." Ward tightened her grip on Wells' arm. "We need to move." Ethan nodded, scanning the room for a viable exit. The windows were shattered but too high to drop down safely, and the stairwell was compromised. That left one option: the fire escape. Ethan gestured toward the far corner, where the rusted remnants of a metal ladder clung to the wall. "Get him out," Ethan said, covering the door as Ward moved Wells toward the escape. The sound of footsteps on the stairs grew louder. There wasn't much time. As Ward maneuvered Wells onto the fire escape, Ethan held his position near the door. The first of the remaining gunmen burst through, his weapon raised, but Ethan was faster. Another charged in, firing wildly, forcing Ethan to dive behind an overturned table for cover. The gunman advanced, but Ethan anticipated the move. He waited for the man to round the table before springing forward, using the rifle as a blunt weapon to knock him unconscious. The room fell silent again, the immediate threat neutralized. Ethan exhaled sharply, his muscles taut as he scanned for any signs of additional attackers. "Ethan!" Ward's voice called from the fire escape. "We've got to go, now!" Ethan moved quickly, joining Ward and Wells on the creaking fire escape. Below, the final vehicle of reinforcements had arrived, more armed men spilling out onto the street. Ethan's sharp eyes darted around, assessing the situation. They couldn't hold their position much longer. "We need to get to the alley," Ethan said, motioning toward a narrow path leading away from the building. "It's our best shot." With no time to argue, Ward and Ethan guided Wells down the rusted ladder, their movements swift despite the tension. Gunfire erupted from the street, bullets pinging off the metal rungs as they descended. Ethan fired back, his shots calculated and precise, buying them precious seconds to escape. Ward kept a firm grip on Wells' arm, her weapon ready. Wells, his composure cracking, muttered, "You're running out of time. You think you stopped anything tonight? My people. Your people are running scared." Ethan cut him off, his voice cold. "And by the end of this, they'll all be behind bars." Wells opened his mouth to reply, but before he could, Ethan's earpiece crackled to life. "Ethan," a familiar voice called. It was one of the plainclothes officers from earlier. "We've intercepted a vehicle near the hotel. It's loaded with equipment and documents. They're trying to scrub the operation." Ethan slowed slightly, his mind racing. "Where are they now?" "They've stopped in the warehouse district, likely regrouping to destroy evidence. We're tracking their location, but we need backup to contain them." Ethan's jaw tightened. This was the moment to strike. If Wells' men succeeded in destroying the documents, dismantling the rest of the operation would become nearly impossible. He turned to Ward. "We take him there." Ward nodded, her expression grim. "Let's finish this." The ride to the warehouse district was tense, the silence punctuated only by the hum of the engine. Wells sat in the back seat, his hands cuffed and his eyes darting nervously. He no longer carried the smug confidence he had earlier. The cracks in his facade were widening. The warehouse loomed ahead, a shadowed structure on the edge of the industrial zone. Several vehicles were parked outside, their engines idling. Ethan could see figures moving inside, hurriedly loading crates and papers into the back of a delivery truck. "They're scrambling," Ward said, peering out the window. "They know this is their last chance." Ethan parked the car a safe distance away. He turned to Ward. "We hit them fast and hard. No room for hesitation." She nodded, her grip tightening on her weapon. "Let's move." Ethan and Ward approached the warehouse from opposite sides, using the shadows for cover. Wells was left secured in the vehicle, his warnings now little more than static in Ethan's mind. This wasn't just about stopping the men inside, it was about dismantling the entire network. Ethan slipped through a side entrance, his movements silent. Inside, the air buzzed with frantic energy. Men shouted orders, crates were slammed shut, and the acrid smell of burning papers filled the space. They were destroying everything they couldn't move. Ward's voice crackled in Ethan's earpiece. "I count 8. For near the truck, 2 at the burning pile, 2 guarding the front." Ethan responded calmly. "Start with the guards. I'll handle the truck." The first guard didn't see Ethan coming. A quick strike to the temple rendered him unconscious, and Ethan dragged the body into the shadows. The second guard turned at the sound but was quickly silenced by Ward, her movements precise and efficient. Ethan moved toward the truck, slipping between crates stacked high with contraband. The men loading the vehicle were distracted, their focus on the task at hand. Ethan waited for the right moment before stepping forward. "Drop everything," he ordered, his voice cutting through the chaos. The men froze, their eyes snapping toward him. One reached for a weapon, but Ethan fired a warning shot into the air. "I said drop everything?" The man hesitated, then slowly raised his hands. The others followed suit, their bravado crumbling under the weight of Ethan's presence. Meanwhile, Ward had neutralized the men near the burning papers, extinguishing the flames before too much evidence could be destroyed. The scene quickly fell under control, the remaining criminals subdued and disarmed. As the sound of approaching sirens filled the air, Ethan and Ward exchanged a brief nod. The police reinforcements arrived moments later, swarming the warehouse and securing the site. Wells was brought inside under heavy guard, his face pale as he took in the scene. The crates of stolen artifacts, the piles of recovered documents, the captured members of his network. It was over, and he knew it. Ethan stood before him, his gaze unwavering. "You thought you could hide behind your operation, Wells. But you left too many cracks." Wells sneered, though the confidence in his voice was gone. "You don't get it, do you? This isn't about me. This is just one piece of something bigger. Then we'll take the whole thing apart," Ethan replied coldly. Hours later, as dawn broke over London, Ethan stood outside the warehouse, his ceremonial stoicism replaced with quiet determination. The network was shattered, its key players in custody, and its plans exposed. But Ethan knew this was only the beginning. As Ward approached, she handed him a file. "Preliminary analysis of the documents. You were right, this wasn't just about the palace. There's more." Ethan nodded, his expression unreadable. "And we'll find it." For now, though, the job was done. The palace was safe, the immediate threat neutralized. And Ethan, the guard who had been underestimated by so many, had proven once again why he was more than just a ceremonial figure.